Alright, welcome back to part 2. Let's continue with Cambrai. So first we have Emery's Choice. Emery's Choice, pretty great actually, one of the good choices to come from the new set. First of all, +3/+3 in Overwhelm is still pretty good. Add 2, it's not amazing, especially in Throne, but especially in Expedition it's very good, and the Overwhelm has some nice implications with on-hit effects like Ramba or Teacher, especially Teacher is the one that comes up the most, or just overwhelming to kill a site, stuff like that. And the fact that it also has non-unit dependent defensive implications with being a bounce plus silence on defense make this quite versatile. Like, it's not a staple, but it's a nice solid tool that we'll see play here and there, even in Throne, and is particularly nice in those colors in Expedition. And in Limited, this is obviously an even greater card. Then we have Intrepid Longhorn, another pretty nice Cambrai card from the new set. So first of all, in Expedition, this is obviously amazing. 2-cost 3/3s are not really a thing in that format, so this reigns supreme here, taking the role of something like Argenport Instigator in early Throne. And even in Throne, this is pretty nice. Either if you want more 2-cost 3/3s in addition to Teacher in your deck, or your deck can't really support Teacher that well, or even cares more about the ramp from this than about what Teacher does, since this also provides a lot of value, and even a hard 2-for-1 potentially, where Teacher only provides sort of disruption and a soft 2-for-1, since the draw is symmetrical. But yeah, all in all, pretty great card. Even in Throne, this is playable. Depends more on if there's a deck that wants it, but in theory, the power level is totally there. And in Limited, this is obviously great. Like, a 2-cost 3/3 at common is insane. Then we have Kirin Ascendant. This card's pretty neat. It's one of the better main deckable attachment removal. It's a 1/3 flying lifesteal that either with some help or after a lot of time even turns into a 3/5 flying lifesteal. And we all know how good lifesteal is in flying and constructed, so this is pretty great. Especially in Expedition, this is amazing. Plays really well with Choice and Finest Hour and even the Drill Master. Also makes for a great market card, obviously. And even in Throne, I think this has the right mix of relevant body and utility and value that it might make it into main decks here and there. And in Limited, this is obviously also a great uncommon. Then we have Shenra Speaks, the first new Harsh Rule effect that we've seen after the original Harsh Rule, at the same cost, because, I mean, we have seen other Harsh Rule effects, but they all cost more, making them not really comparable. This is the first alternate version of Harsh Rule that fulfills exactly the same role, because the 6 and 7 cost versions are pretty niche and slow usually, and therefore don't really fill the same role. So this is obviously a lot harder to cast, but the silence can come in really handy against recursion stuff, and especially Entomb. So this is pretty nice. Much more restricted in which decks you can put it, obviously, but other than that, in the decks that can support it, it's basically a straight upgrade. And even, especially in Expedition, it's very important to exist, because otherwise we wouldn't have a sweeper at all there. So it's pretty impactful and part of what defines the format there. And in Limited, I mean, it's still a pretty good card if you can make your opponent play into it. Then we have Armory Dragonbane, the Cambrai 6 influence 6-drop. Here we get a 6/6, and yeah, if your units have completed all of their mastery abilities, they get those effect 2 additional times, and then you reset their masteries. So this can generate a lot of value. Unfortunately, the most value it generates in like colors where it's not in, like with cards like Kozin and stuff. I actually once got this from an Equivocate in a game, played it, got like 2 more dragons from Kozin, and I think had another mastery that I also got value from, but I don't quite remember what it was. But yeah, in the colors that it's in, there isn't that much to gain out of this. Sure, you can like give your make your Shenra like monstrously big, but it still dies to regular removal and stuff like that. So it's not generating like actual like card advantage. And yeah, enemy dragons can't be played as neat, especially in Expedition where dragons are kind of a thing. But yeah, all in all, it's just a bunch of cute things and not reliably good enough, which is why we haven't seen it really played in any format. I mean, in Limited, a 6-cost 6/6 with potential upsides is already good enough, so there it's still a pretty nice 6-drop. Then we have Sodi's Choice, clearly one of the weak choices. Yeah, either you can basically put a Sandbind on a unit, making it, grounding it if it is flying, so it helps deal with flyers. You can, in best case, blow your opponent out by, since it's a fast spell, taking away the flying mid-combat and then eating it in combat, making it a decent anti-flyer removal in the right circumstances, and then it also lets you negate a fast spell, which is pretty limited. Like even in Expedition, I don't think the card is widely applicable enough to see any play. Have not seen it played yet, and in Throne it's even worse. In Limited, however, it seems like an okay option as a one-off in your draft deck potentially. Now we have Sodi's Spell Shaper, one of the spoilers of the staples to come out of the set. Pretty nice, like even if you play it without Spellcraft on turn 2 sometimes on like your Borderlands Lookout, you get to hit for an extra damage, it replaces itself immediately, and from there on out the opponent basically has to aggressively deal with it or they are in huge trouble. Especially in Expedition, this is massively format defining and the reason why Elysian is the most popular deck. And even in Throne, this card has been seeing its fair share of play. It's a bit clunky in Throne at times at 4, and we have a lot of cheaper, better removal stuff, but it still does a lot of powerful things and is quite flexible in Throne. And in Limited, this is obviously a bomb. Then we have Wanderlust Kirin. I think the card's pretty bad, like it's not even a constructed consideration, and I think even in Limited it's quite bad. Like Muster is not that easy, and you have to muster like once or twice for this to be a good card. If you don't muster at all, the card is not worth the investment of a card. So yeah, if your deck can muster fairly reliably at least once, this is a pretty decent 2-drop. But even then, if you draw it late and you can't, like your hand is empty and you can't muster anymore, it's pretty weak. So yeah, not a big fan, even in Limited. Then we have Sodi, the Metamorph, basically Eternal's Dark Confident type card. Here, instead of taking damage, we have highly restrictive influence requirements, 6 on turn 3, making this really hard to possibly play on turn 3 in Expedition, but it can happen with like a dual heavy draw, maybe a Trailmaker to help. So it's, especially in Expedition, less of a 3-drop, but even as a 3-cost card that you play on like turn 5, this is still a pretty good card. You get a solid body, 3-cost, 3/3. Obviously the opponent has to answer it, otherwise you're drawing 2 cards a turn versus their 1, and sometimes you just get to play like a Sodi Spell Shaper for free or randomly refresh your power by, I don't know, using a killer effect on your Griffin and then killing something, giving you the attachment part and resetting, refreshing your power. In Throne, however, this is quite reliably playable on 3 actually these days with 16 duels, like dual faction powers. And yeah, it's obviously also easier answered there with Torch and Desecrate and stuff, but that's not really an argument. Like the card is just really, really powerful and a nice addition to Elysian's toolkit. In Limited, it's still really powerful, but it'll take a long time to play this. A lot of the time you won't even be able to play it on turn 6, or like when you have 6 power. But yeah, it's really powerful, so even in Limited, you're usually gonna put it in your deck if you're in Elysian. And then we have Eli and Miso. I think in Throne, we have so many 5-drops, and most of them are bringing a bit more to the table than this, because this just kind of is comparable to Cerso, except that it's less dominant against color combinations or decks that can't answer it well, like Praxis. And outside of these color combinations, they both suffer from the same issue of just dying to like cheap removal and being a huge tempo loss, which is not really what you want your 5-drop to be. In Limited, this is a bomb, and in Expedition, this is also a really powerful, not that easily and also not cheaply answered threat. And next we have Nahid's Faithful. This card is really amazing. Like, even like a 1-cost 2/1 lifesteal is pretty decent, but the summon effect is just so good. Like, think of all the sex synergies, and then also with the right synergies making this sort of a 1-cost 4/3 lifesteal, because if you have something that you can sort of sack for free, it's amazing. The card is super powerful and deck defining in Expedition in the cultist decks. It is even powerful enough to make it into Throne, and in Draft this still seemed like a pretty good card. So yeah, just an amazing common to come out of the set. Next we have the next amazing Xenon cards. We all know Xenon was in a really rough spot, so good to see that there are a bunch of good Xenon cards in this set, and this is no different. Worthy Cause, fast removal, silences stuff even if it doesn't kill it. Silence also making it so that if there's entombs or recursion going on, that's not gonna matter. Same with the permanent ManuS effect, making recursion really awkward. And then you have the option to Decimate. If you're in a bind and need some health, doesn't come up that often, but it comes up and it's a nice option to have. The main downside basically is you want to have like a lot of small units and kind of sex theme going on to fill your void, so this actually kills stuff and not just cripples it a bit and silences it. But other than that, the card is super amazing. Great in Throne, great in Expedition, even great in Limited, just an amazing card. I mean, what else can you ask of a 1-cost fast removal? Then we have Nahid's Choice. Possibly, or like arguably the best choice in the new set. Really great. Either you get 2 1/1s, which is great, especially given the sack fodder synergies that we just talked about. Also, they are cultists, so they also matter for cultist synergies. Then the other mode is super real. Discarding a side or a spell is great, so it gives your deck bodies to feed your sack engine early, and in the mid game you can just take away their sweeper or their high impact side or their like Channel of the Tempest or whatever. Yeah, card is just super versatile, really, really great new choice, and in Throne and Expedition alike, and even in Limited, it's pretty good. Then we have Senzu, Hand of Nahid, one of the bigger payoff cards for the whole cultist synergies. Innocuous 2-cost 2/2, cultist himself, and at the start of your turn you discard the top card of your deck, and when another cultist goes to your void, Senzu gets +1/+1 and you gain 1 health. So you want to have a lot of cultists in your deck, then Senzu just randomly mills them, growing himself, and then also if they die in combat or get sacked to sacrifice stuff, also grows him, then he gains 1 health, so there's also life force synergies here with Cultist Tyrant and stuff like that. So yeah, guy does a lot of stuff. Problem is a bit that this type of like kind of synergy heavy, lower to the ground proactive cultist strategy is a bit overshadowed by the like grindier mid-rangey cultist stuff in the format, in both formats right now. But in like a vacuum, the card's still pretty strong, and even if the card right now is not at its prime, I can see the card coming back for more in the future, especially with some more support. So it's definitely an interesting card to keep an eye out for. And even in Limited, I mean, if you have some cultists, a 2-cost 2/2 is not terrible if you're looking for a 2-drop. And if you have some ways to make him grow once or twice, then he becomes pretty good, pretty quick for a Limited card. And then the last Xenon card is Nahid, the Immortal. The 6 influence Xenon card here, this time a 7-drop though, not a 6-drop. 7-cost 7/7, nothing flashy here. And at the start of each player's turn, they sacrifice another unit. If they can't, Nahid deals 7 damage to them, so it eats the board on both sides, so it's symmetrical, gotta keep that in mind. And yeah, the first time you have 50 health or more, you get to play Nahid from your deck. It only plays one Nahid, so if you have multiples in your deck, you don't get all of them. And yeah, I don't think that's very relevant. If you get to 50 health, that's in matchups where this is usually win more, and if you draw the card, it's a pretty bad card. So I think Constructed the card is pretty unplayable in any of the formats really. And in Limited, I mean, it's a 7 cost, 7/7 with some nice text on it, so you usually put it in your deck if you want a 7-drop in your deck. On to Huru. We have Electrostatic Distortion, pretty weak and situational curse. Curse player can't have more than 1 armor, and their spells deal -1 damage. Yeah, seems like a pretty subpar Hoser card against armory type decks that don't even really exist anymore, and the spell damage reduction hasn't proven good enough either, especially if it costs you a whole card as investment. So yeah, I don't see a point for this card even as a market card right now. Then we have Parul's Choice, one of the more decent choices from the new set, basically a better protect since it gives +1/+1 in addition to the Aegis. As a downside, you can't give yourself Aegis, unlike with Protect, but you get the alternate mode of drawing a curse of your choice from your deck that you haven't played this game. So in Expedition, this means stuff like AV Graft and Permafrost, for example, and a couple of fringe options that you want to consider, which is where this card shines, like in Expedition in Uro aggressive decks. It's pretty nice. Aegis is pretty strong when the removal is weak and clunky and very limited, and there's no Vara, baby Vara. In Throne, however, I think the card's going to be too expensive and narrow for the cost, so I don't think it's going to make much of a splash there. In Limited, however, it's a pretty nice trick, and if you have something to tutor for, it gets even better. Next we have Misery Walker, 3 cost, 2/3, and it has flying and lifesteal when an enemy is cursed. In Throne, we get this in way better and way less conditional with Commando, so that's not relevant. But in Expedition, we don't have that, so in Expedition this is kind of a decent constructed consideration if you have enough curse givers like Outcast, Temple Shihan, stuff like that, and a couple of other ways, Permafrost, maybe the blue coin, making this a decent 3-drop consideration. And in Limited, I mean, if you have a couple of curses to activate this, this is pretty good. Otherwise, it's not worth playing. And we have Forbidden Rider Outcast. In Throne, I think this is a bit small and a bit too hit or miss, because against like non-unit decks, the Curse of Loneliness is not going to be that strong. The strength comes really from the pseudo 2-for-1 on shutting down an opposing unit. But there's still potential that this might show up niche-wise here and there in Throne. In Expedition, however, it's a pretty great 4-drop, so if you are in these colors, it's a card you at least want to consider. And in Limited, this is a powerhouse, so it's a really powerful rare. If you open it, you're probably going to first pick it and try to draft Huru. And last but not least, for part 2, we have Parul Sealkeeper, the 6 influence Huru card. For 6, it's a 5/5 endurance, your griffins deal double damage, and on summon, you get to play a griffin with flying and attack and health equal to the number of curses on the enemy player and their units to further support and push the Curse Matters Huru theme. There are a couple of incidental decent curses, like stuff from Outcast, the 3-cost Griffin, Shihan, and so on and so forth, making this pretty decent without going overboard on playing like situational and kind of subpar curses. But I feel like it's just not what you want to be doing in Huru and Expedition, and in Throne it's even worse. So right now in Constructed it's in an odd place, even though the power level is pretty decent. In Limited, however, it's pretty good, especially if you have a few Griffins and a few curses, but even without like a 6-cost 5/5 endurance with situational upside is pretty solid. Not great though. Worse than some of the other 6 influence units we talked about. Anyway, that wraps up part 2, and I'll be back in a moment with the remaining 2 2 faction alliances and the rest of the cards. So stay tuned.